In this video, I'm going to share with you some really basic paint tips that'll help you with your airbrushing. Let's get into it right now. So this first tip might be a little bit obvious, but it doesn't matter what brand of paint you're using. The one thing I do before using any of my airbrush paint is to give it a really good shake. So you can hear the Trident bottles have a marble in them, and when you buy the empty bottle sets, you can see this is how they come. Pretty much all of the brands will have some sort of mixing ball bearing or marble in them. So you can hear with the Createx paint, and especially with something that is metallic like the Chroma Air, you really want to give that a good shake. The next thing you got to think about is, do I need to thin out my paint? Now most of the airbrush paints are ready to use, and you can see if I put some of this Trident blue into my Eclipse, this airbrush having a 0.35mm needle nozzle set up, it's still going to flow through, and I'm running at about 30 psi. You can see it's a little bit intermittent, but you can definitely paint straight out of the bottle with the Trident paint. And this works really well if you want really quick coverage, or if you're doing t-shirts or murals, something like that. That said, I still prefer using reducer in my paint. I just find it flows so much better. And if you are new to airbrushing, then I'd recommend starting with an equal parts mixing ratio, so 1:1. You can do this by eye. Give it a good shake. And now if I run another test with this 1:1 ratio at that same PSI, you can notice straight away how much smoother the airbrush will run. And I'm even able to go a lot finer with it. And you can really see there's no issue with this airbrush to get fine detail. And you can even tweak it further by dropping the PSI down more and over thinning your paint. But you can really notice how fine that's performing. And the only thing I did was thin it out. So that's fine for general airbrushing and using the Eclipse or something like the PS289. But what if you're using an Iwata Micron or this PS771? This one here runs a 0.18mm needle nozzle setup. And if I remove that air cap, you can really see how fine that needle is. Now with something like this, again, the 1:1 ratio will work. However, whenever I'm using these finer brushes, I'll over thin my paint, and I generally work off a 30% paint, 70% reducer ratio, and I'll drop my PSI down to 18 to 20 PSI. I'll pop a link in the description to a video which will discuss those ratios in more detail, as well as give you an example of me mixing them. And another thing that I think is really essential, especially if your paints have been sitting on the shelf for a while, after you've given them a really good mix, I would strain your paint. So using one of these paper cone strainers, you tip your paint in the top, and that's just going to strain through that 190 micron, and that way you're going to trap any contaminants or dried paint that you may get from your old bottle lids that have been sitting around. That's going to stop that from dropping into your airbrush, giving you much cleaner paint, and it'll also help to minimize tip drying. So for this demonstration, I've got an old t-shirt here, and it's just stretched over a core flute board. And what I want to show you is when you're airbrushing on t-shirts, let's say for instance you want to color in up until that line. For starters, you don't want to be too far away. If you're too far away, you're going to start to get overspray. And you can see how much overspray that's creating from being about, say, 10 centimeters from the surface. So what I like to do when working on a t-shirt, by the way, these are great to practice on, especially if you're a beginner, nice and forgiving. You want to be up nice and close. You can also angle the airbrush if you like, so that the overspray travels more in this direction. Right, and you just colour in like so. You can see I'm nice and close. And then when I'm in this area here, because I know there's no other edge on this side, I can then come further away, and it makes it easier to colour in and easier to get a 50-50 overlap, which basically means that your first pass has an overspray width like so. So the next one needs to be 50% overlapped onto the first, like this, so that you get nice even coverage. And you'll notice as well that when I'm painting, I'm going paint on, paint off, paint on, paint off, but I'm keeping that air on at all times. So what you don't want to do is, let's say I'm working up at this edge, I've come in nice and close, right, and then moving over into here, this is what I call the safe zone. I start to colour in like this. You can see I'm not moving that trigger back and forth, I'm just finding the paint and then moving the airbrush around. And when I zoom in, you can see how patchy that is. So you've got these heavier blobs of paint. When I was moving, those bits are where I'm going back and forth. So they're building up heavier than in the other areas, making it appear patchy and almost looking like I've coloured that in with a texture. Whereas, just to show you again, if I do the same thing and I'm up nice and close, but I'm putting that paint on and off, and I'm doing my 50-50 overlap, and let me zoom in again, you can really notice the difference. That's much, much smoother than this. Okay, so that's the other painting tip, especially when you want to airbrush t-shirts. You need to keep that air press down at all times and then pull back for paint. And it's paint on, paint off, and just moving that trigger finger back and forth. And then up nice and close to colour in and minimise your overspray on the edges. However, I'm still pulling back on that trigger and then shutting it back to the start position. And that allows me to get nice, even coverage. So to fast track your learning, you can definitely check out our online airbrushing course at airbrushisylum.thinkific.com, or you can continue to watch some of the videos that are listed here. And until next time, go grab your airbrush, do some amazing artwork yourself, and I'll see you again very, very soon in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.